Dark Souls is considered a masterpiece by many. Some even say that it shaped their life. Why is that? Why is Dark Souls so special? To answer my question, I replayed Dark Souls, specifically the remaster on my PS5. Replaying this game after playing all its successors, from Dark Souls 2, 3, Bloodborne, Sekiro, through to Elden Ring, has given me newfound appreciation for a game that certainly isn't perfect, but did so many things so well that the flaws can be overlooked. Now, as much as I love Dark Souls, there are flaws. So that is the first thing that we are going to address. Now, don't get me wrong, I praise the Sun just as much as the next Sun Bro, but we are going to look at some of the flaws that Dark Souls has, and then we will talk about why it's so beloved, all the great things. That way we end on a high note. Let's begin with something that most new players will notice immediately: the controls. The controls of this game are complicated to say the least. Each weapon has simple attacks like light and heavy attack, but also contain things like backstep attacks, roll attacks, charge attack, weapon arts, sprinting attacks, jump attacks, plunging attacks, and worst of all, most of those have two-handed variants. For veterans of the series, this is great because each weapon has a diverse move pool that allows a player to truly master their weapon. On the other hand, it is so overwhelming that most players will stick to the usual R1 spam. Another jank thing that I noticed with controls is the claw grip that you have to adopt while sprinting. Since the sprint button has to be held down, right? It's not a toggle. I have to move my right thumb off the analog controls over to sprint, which is on circle for PlayStation. Then I claw my right pointer finger down to replace my thumb on the camera controls. That way I can hold sprint and tilt the camera at the same time. It creates this unusual grip that I don't use for any other game other than Dark Souls and other FromSoft titles. It's weird, but I guess you get used to it with time. Moving away from controls, I think the game doesn't teach the player enough about how to get stronger. Yes, leveling up the right stats will make you stronger, but so will upgrading your weapon, infusing your weapon, improving your armor, finding new ring combinations, so on and so forth. On my initial playthrough of Dark Souls years ago, I spent all my souls leveling up inefficiently, not knowing what weapon or magic I might want to use. Not only that, but I overlooked the critical nature of upgrading gear. It feels as though part of Dark Souls' difficulty is brought through the obscurity of its gameplay systems rather than the strength and complexity of its enemies. Another thing that bothers me about the first Dark Souls is how certain items trivialize the playthrough. So choosing either the Thief class or choosing the Master Key as your gift gives you the Master Key, right? The Thief class comes with it. And this means you can head to Blighttown through the Valley of the Drakes. It means you can skip the depths completely. It means that you can get the Grass Crest Shield and a Black Knight Halberd really early in the game. So it kind of trivializes a lot of playthroughs. For those unfamiliar, Black Knights have a 20% chance of dropping their weapon when killed. If you get good RNG and get the drop, then the rest of your playthrough becomes a breeze. Black Knight weapons are so powerful that they outscale almost everything with little investment. They are so good that speedrunners use the Black Knight Halberd for their run, since they can scoop it up in the Grass Crest Shield at the beginning of the game. What I don't like is how the drop rate is 20%, effectively killing 4 of 5 speedruns early on. It also makes players feel obligated to change their build plans when one of the weapons drops, since it's so powerful. It's also something that you can never plan on since it's luck-based. I like having rare, powerful weapons, but the way they affect the game bothers me. Moving away from that though, let's talk about the bosses. There are bad bosses in this game. Exhibit A is what you have just witnessed, the Bed of Chaos. It is not a good fight, and I truly don't care what others have to say on the subject. Compared to the other Lord Souls you have to obtain, this is by far the most irritating. Exhibits B and C are bosses that were fine when initially encountered, but became enemies in the world later in the playthrough, shrinking their significance. Those bosses are Taurus Demon and Capra Demon. The only negative thing I have to say about their initial encounters is screw Capra Demon's arena and the 2 dogs in there. That is just bad design in my opinion. Exhibits D and E are essentially the tutorial boss, Asylum Demon, with 1 or 2 new moves. Stray Demon is at the Undead Asylum directly underneath the arena for Asylum Demon. The only thing that Stray Demon adds to the fight is a magic AoE appendaged onto his regular attacks. The other reskin is Demon Fire Sage, whom you run into at the end of Demon Ruins. He essentially is Stray Demon, but with fire. And immediately after you fight him, you fight Centipede Demon, which makes me wonder, why did we need to have 2 boss fights back to back when one is just a mere reskin? It felt like fluff and I did not like it. Speaking of the garbage Demon Ruins, there are several areas in the game that are literally unfinished. Demon Ruins and Lost Isolus vast expanses are polar opposites to the complex, maze-like levels found earlier in the game. Also, both the Darkroot Forest and its DLC counterpart, the Royal Wood, are nearly empty. All these areas are the flyover states of Dark Souls. Another 2 areas that I forgot to mention while writing this is the Catacombs and the Tomb of the Giants. I mean, I don't think I've met a single Dark Souls player who has enjoyed going through the Catacombs and the Tomb of the Giants, especially the Tomb of the Giants. That area is so frustrating. It's like, oh, let's just make it so the player can't see and have these enemies that like one-shot you. You walk up on them, get jump scared, and then fall off a cliff. Anyways, it's a whole deal. I hate those areas. I never have fun playing through them. I try to beat the Catacombs systematically, like a regular Dark Souls level, but when I get to Tomb of the Giants after Pinwheel, I just sprint straight on through. I just run and run and run to hell with Tomb of the Giants. Another glaring issue is the balancing of magic use. It's clear that the developers at FromSoft found a system they liked when they implemented the Ashen Estus Flask into Dark Souls 3. It was carried over to Elden Ring, and it's a creative solution around magic charges. You want more MP refills? Then you don't get as many health pots. It is flawless game design compared to the set uses we have in Dark Souls 1. The last negative is something that Elden Ring players haven't had to deal with: boss runs. All the Dark Souls games, including the first, have terrible runbacks to boss arenas if you die. There is no Stake of Marika equivalent for them. Dark Souls 1 isn't the biggest offender here. That'd be Dark Souls 2, but it's still tilting. Alright, so those are the negatives. They're out of the way. Let's talk about the real reasons this game is so special. Why so many people hold Dark Souls 1 near and dear to their hearts. The first positive I want to look at are the bosses of Dark Souls 1. They are the true gatekeepers of skill. The Asylum Demon makes sure players understand the basics of the game before they can leave the tutorial. Both Quelaag and the Bell Gargoyles gatekeep the 2 bells to open Sense Fortress, assuring that players are prepared for the fortress and Anor Londo beyond it. ONS prepares players to fight the 4 lords, and Gwyn stands as the final test for those who've conquered the rest of the game. I think all these bosses offer the right amount of challenge for where they are placed. The special thing about Dark Souls bosses is that they force you to learn. Very rarely can you just out DPS a boss, and very rarely can you cheese them. To beat them, you have to learn their movesets, master spacing, master timings, and manage resources such as your stamina bar and Estus Flask. Many times, those who master more difficult techniques like parries get rewarded. If you can master parry timings, then the final boss of the game, Gwyn, becomes a cakewalk. Each boss kill truly makes you better at the game as a whole, and with that skill increase comes a true sense of accomplishment. Those feelings carry over to conquering areas and the enemies within as well. Dark Souls 1 does not have levels like other games. Rather, it has a fully functional, meticulously thought out world. Every area is in place because it's congruent with the lore and logistics. Firelink Shrine lies at the heart of the world and connects players to everything. You can head up the cliff face to the right to the Undead Burg and later to Undead Parish. The parish links to the depths, which can take you to Blighttown, but also gives you a shortcut right back to Firelink. Once you go to Blighttown, if you head across, you'll find yourself in the Valley of the Drakes, which can take you to New Londo Ruins, which takes you back to Firelink. From Valley of the Drakes, you can head straight to Darkroot Basin, which takes you to Darkroot Garden, which loops back to the Undead Parish in 2 unique ways, through the bottom of Havel's Tower, or past the Titanite demon to Andre of Astora. Undead Parish also links straight back to Firelink and grants you the ability to return to the Undead Asylum. All those areas cover just the first half of the game. The areas of the later half aren't as webbed together, but rather are appendages to areas in that web. You also gain the ability to warp, so you don't have to waste too much time in travel, feel more free to explore, and don't have to be committed to one area because you don't want to backtrack. Narrowing our scope to individual areas, I've noticed since playing future FromSoft games like Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring, that bonfires are much farther and fewer between in Dark Souls 1. It's not because the devs are asking more of you, but the individual areas have shortcuts built in so you can reuse the same bonfire. The levels are condensed, have verticality, and many doors, gateways, and ladders to use to make traversal easier. Briefly touching on the online features of the game, I think that the restrictive features of having to summon players to your world, and you have to go area by area and boss by boss, rather than them just being in your world for an extended amount of time, I think that those restrictions actually create a sense of community. That and the messages that you see on the floor just as you're playing the game make you feel like you're not the only one in this world. Covenants also create a sense of belonging and allegiance, since large parts of the PvP are focused around being in certain covenants and invading or defending certain areas. Speaking about the lore of Dark Souls, this is a true underdog story. It feeds the flames of that sense of accomplishment you get from conquering enemies and areas and bosses, as you, the underdog, the chosen undead, conquer all these enemies just to make your way to rekindle the flame. It's truly a story about greatness from nothing. The cool thing about the lore in Dark Souls is that there is a lot to learn. You can learn a lot about Gwyn and his family, about Guinevere and Gwendolyn, and the story of Anor Londo. You can learn about the story of the Abyss, and the Four Kings down there, and Manus, and Artorias and his wolf Sif. You can learn about things like Seath the Scaleless, and why he's there in the Duke's Archive, and it's pretty close to Anor Londo, and there's a lot to learn. The amazing thing about Dark Souls game design and the lore is that everything in the game is there for a purpose or a reason, and serves the lore in some way. Every NPC, every item, everything is there for a reason. There is lore behind every ounce of this game. There's no waste. Everything has a purpose. I don't have a lot to say about the audio design of Dark Souls 1, but I will say this. It must be effective because I can recognize both music and sounds. I know a Dark Souls track when I hear it, even years after completing the game. The other thing that I recognize is sound effects. I know when a Silver Knight is rolling up behind me. I recognize the screech of the rats, the croaks of the curse frogs, and the sounds they make as they spray their death vapor. All of it. I recognize it all. Overall, I would say that Dark Souls is a very purposeful game. Every bit of lore, every bit of music and sound effects, of gameplay and bosses, everything in this game has purpose. This is not just another AAA cash grab where From Software wanted to make a bunch more money, so they made a follow-up to Demon's Souls. This is a true piece of art, a passion project, and despite its flaws, I would still consider it a masterpiece. I know, a masterpiece with flaws, but that's truly what I think Dark Souls is. Most of these flaws have been addressed by future installments in the series, and From Software has just continued to hone their craft. Nothing is perfect in this world, but Dark Souls comes damn close. If you made it this far and you're hearing me right now at the end of this video, thank you for watching. Please leave a like on the video and please hit that subscribe button. I'd very much appreciate it. I hope you guys stick around and watch more of my videos, and I will catch you in the next one. Later.